Namaskar and welcome to this exciting episode of Sattology, Debunking Mythology. Sat means truth in Sanskrit. Logos means a study or science. Sattology means a science of truth or study of truth. Opposite of that is mythology. Myth is a Sanskrit root word which means a fake lie or imagination. Many Sanskrit words come from there. Mithya, mithyachar, mithyahankar. And when you combine with logos, it becomes science of fake lie imagination or study of fake lie imagination. It's a very interesting thing to note why we use the word mythology. I'm talking about the Western academics against ancient cultures of the world. Whether it's South American culture, the word was specifically coined for the Indian civilization because that was the most sophisticated during that time for the British to outsmart. And most of the other invaders to India were already lost. Like in 1741, Marthand Varma directly defeated the Dutch, the most powerful navy, in a straight fight in Kerala, in the state of Kerala. So mythology word we should not use for ancient histories, particularly well documented like Indian civilization, based on Ramayana and Mahabharata. So I have a very, very special guest today who has written a new book, and that book is Reclaiming Hindu Temples, Episodes from an Oppressive Era. Without delay, let us welcome Dr. Chandni Sengupta.
Namaskar, everyone.
Welcome to the show. Now,
Thank you.
Your title is like straight, Episodes from an Oppressive Era. And most of the Western academics won't agree with the word of oppressive. So,
Right.
So how did you come up with this title?
Well, oppressive is something that is, I think I would say that it is the least demeaning word. I mean, the history of this period that I have picked up and theme of the book, it is basically based on the Delhi Sultanate period. And when you look at the atrocities committed by these marauders, by the Islamic marauders on the Hindus and on all the Indic people of India, I think oppressive itself is a very mild word. It could have been any other word, which would have been a much stronger word than oppressive. But, keeping it more academic in nature and to kind of, keep it centered on history, I think I've used this word oppressive because the kind of atrocities that were meted out to the Indians and during this period, it was in fact very clearly the bloodiest part of Indian history. One can call it the bloodiest part of Indian history. There was plunder, genocide, loot, rape, and all other kinds of atrocities which the human mind can imagine were in fact meted out to the people of the Bharatiya civilization. And it is because of this that this period and the period that followed the period of the Delhi Sultanate, which is the Mughal period, can be very clearly mentioned as oppressive. Bharat was a golden bird. It was known as the Sone ki Chidiya. It was, in fact, one of the most prosperous civilizations in the world. I would say the most prosperous civilizations in the world. And what happened after the coming of the Arabs, or the Arab conquest of Sindh, or the coming of the Turks, Mahmud of Ghazni, Muhammad Ghori, the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate by the Ilbari Turks, it was beyond oppressive, I would say. And the Islamic invasions actually plunged Bharat into what can clearly be called a dark age. And this book is about that. It is about how from Sone ki Chidiya, or from the golden bird, India or Bharat is plunged into a dark age. How many temples are destroyed? What is the geographical expanse of this temple destruction? And also, I have focused on the primary sources, the works of the chroniclers, who were, some of them, in fact, were also part of the armies of these marauders. So how these people have mentioned in very glorious terms that, so and so temple was looted in this part of the world, the idol was destroyed in such a manner, it was trampled upon foot, it was carried to Ghazni, or it was carried to another part of Afghanistan, and how it was desecrated there. So it is only for any one of us to imagine how badly we would have been humiliated in that part of the, in that part of the world also, and how our civilization would have been denigrated at that point of time. So which is why the word oppressive has been used.
Very interesting to note that they were giving reports to their masters in wherever they came from, and they were trying to prove that what they have done and what they are going to do. Now, it also generates a what do you call it, Stockholm syndrome in the people who are oppressed like that, where sometimes the oppressed actually starts glorifying the oppressor, and it has continued till now in India. Most of the historians, like the fake historians like Irfan Habib and all these people, they've
Yes.
been glorifying the oppressors. So do you think that the impact of those atrocities so many hundreds of years back are still very strongly imprinted or alive, kept alive through these historians in India? Because
Absolutely.
the Western world follows them. The Western world academics, they quote these people. And and
Absolutely.
and the funny thing is, if you look at their academic background of all these historians, Romila Thapar and the other person, Irfan Habib, they are like Oxford, Cambridge, and only the foreign authors. Like if you ask them, what about Banaras Hindu University? Why didn't you take a degree from there? But they will all show Western to give credibility into India. But the India has changed now.
Right.
So what do you say the cross linkages between the two?
Right. Now, so to understand why Irfan Habib writes the way he does, or why does Romila Thapar write the way she does, it is very important to understand how this Marxist school of thought actually penetrated so deep in the post independence period. It was only in the 1950s and the 1960s that the Marxist school of thought actually, got a headway. And how does this happen, and why does this happen? For that, we need to understand three important perspectives on Indian history. The first is the colonial school of thought. The second is the nationalist school of thought. And the third is the Marxist school of thought. So it is only when we understand these three perspectives will we be able to understand how does this Marxist perspective gain momentum gradually. So when we look at the colonial school of thought, the basic idea was that Indian society was backward and degenerate. That's what all these colonial historians, whether it is Elphinstone or whether it is anybody, any one of these colonial historians, the basic idea was that India was a backward society, it was a degenerate society. However, there was one group of these colonial historians, the Orientalists, like Sir William Jones. They wanted to, in fact, establish a link between Sanskrit and the European languages, just to show that there is an umbilical cord between the British, who were our rulers at that point of time, and the Indian population, the larger Indian population. So for that, they wanted to establish a link between Sanskrit and the European languages. And of course, Sanskrit, as we know, is the mother of all languages in the world. So they tried to somehow project that the ancient past of India was a glorious one, and rightly so. So the Orientalists had a slightly different perspective than the other colonial historians. And the Orientalists also believed that the Islamic invasions or the marauders who came from Afghanistan, they actually plunged India into the Dark Age. Then, when we talk about the nationalist historians, after the colonial historians, it were the nationalist historians who wrote about Indian history. And here the works of scholars like Jadunath Sarkar and A.L. Srivastava, Ishwari Prasad are very important, and they presented the correct view of Indian history. R.C. Majumdar also. Now, they clearly referred to the Muslim rule in Bharat as a foreign rule. So they did not mince their words. They clearly called it an alien rule, a foreign rule, and also a period of degeneration and oppression. So this was the dominant school of thought you can say before the partition of India, the national school of thought was extremely, extremely popular. Now, what happens in the post-independence period in the 1950s and the 1960s is that the Marxist school of thought becomes very prominent. And people like Irfan Habib, of course, comes later. It is his father, Muhammad Habib, who writes on Indian history, and he basically claims that with the Islamic rule, with the establishment of the Islamic rule in India, there was upward social mobility. So he tried to show that because in Islam there was no casteism, therefore the lower castes among the Hindus got a chance to upgrade themselves. Now, at that point of time, with the influence of this kind of a narrative that Islam does not preach about caste and there is equality, and the lower castes converted to Islam, the artisanal castes predominantly converted to Islam, and this entire narrative which was set by Muhammad Habib through his texts become very popular. Also, one needs to keep in mind that in India, beginning from the first HRD minister, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, we've had a lot of Muslim HRD ministers, or the education ministers in India, and of course there was an agenda to project history in a certain manner. And the Marxist historians like Muhammad Habib, Satish Chandra's work on medieval India is taught in every Indian university, whether you study in Jammu or you study in the southern part of India. Every history professor will recommend Satish Chandra's works, and Satish Chandra's works are replete with justifications for the Muslim rule in India. So then comes Irfan Habib, Romila Thapar, and all these other Marxist scholars. So we need to understand why this Stockholm syndrome actually developed. Because the historians who were writing at that point of time, they were greatly influenced by this class caste narrative which was, of course, an imported kind of a narrative. It does not kind of hold true as far as the Indian civilization is concerned. And they wanted to then transport that to the history of medieval India. And, that of course, went on till till India attained independence. And also the fact that a lot of our education ministers were Muslims. So a certain narrative had to be pushed. So the Islamic invasions were glorified. And of course, as you mentioned, that there was a kind of Stockholm syndrome. So this was why the Stockholm syndrome actually took shape in India.
One interesting thing to note is like most of these historians have followed a very strict British line. Like the British version of the history matches very closely with the history of all these invaders. And invaders were like, one of the biggest myths was Bharat Sone ki Chidiya, because they were trying to motivate their soldiers. If they will say Bharat Sone ka Sher, then nobody is going to attack. But unfortunately, when they attacked through Rajasthan, even Sindh also, Raja Dahir and they severely opposed. In fact, most of the Arabic invaders were killed in Sindh, and it took many years after that before they could even conquer Sindh. So they were all shocked that you told us Sone ki Chidiya, there's a Sher. They're very strong people. So the all these versions of history, and still it become a folklore. Like you also quoted, and many others quoted, Bharat Sone ka Chidiya. But that was a Persian saying, not an Indian saying. Persians used to tell to motivate their soldiers that Bharat Sone ka Chidiya hai, because nobody attacks a lion. So it's still continuing. Like the second thing is, like if you ask any Indian, how do we go to Afghanistan? If they can come to India, then you can go the same way to Afghanistan. It's not a big thing. In the Mahabharat war, Gandhar, and even Balik is west of Parsik, and Parsik is Iraq, up to Iraq. So Jordan, Levant, Lebanon, and Syria were part of the Balik kingdoms. So this was a known history. But the biggest fault was the colonial people. They tried to fix the entire Mahabharat in the small map of British India. And that too, they cut off Burma, they cut off Sri Lanka, they cut off Afghanistan in 1919, and 1947 was there. So, what are the interesting episodes you see? Like when you have already captured many episodes there. There's a title of the book that many, just give a glimpse, and I want the viewers to buy it book, and it's available on Amazon or wherever. Which publisher in India it is from?
This is Garuda Prakashan. The
Garuda,
publisher is Garuda Prakashan. They're based in Gurgaon.
Garuda Prakashan, and we know them very well. And you can search Dr. Chandni Sengupta on their website. Is garudabooks.in, I think, right? The garudabooks.in. You can search it out, Garuda Prakashan, and by the author's name, Dr. Chandni Sengupta. So, what are these interesting episodes? If you can just tell for the audience a little bit that any incident where they are coming in and what they actually faced.
Right. So basically, the book is divided into 9 chapters roughly, and with an introduction and a conclusion, of course. And in terms of episodes, I have, in fact, covered the history of the Sultanate period, primarily from the 8th century, which is the coming of the Arabs to India, the destruction of Sindh, and then I have taken it up to the middle of the 16th century. This is just pre-Mughal period, so till the Lodhis, right? So it is an expansive history from the 8th century, early 8th century, till the middle of the 16th century that I have looked at. So as far as the first chapter is concerned, there are many episodes which I have in fact mentioned in the book. But as far as the destruction of Sindh that we were looking at, we were just discussing. In fact, as Aditya ji also mentioned, that it was very, very difficult, in fact, for the Arabs, for Muhammad bin Qasim's army to, in fact, take over Sindh. And Raja Dahir and his army, in fact, played a very significant role, a pivotal role. His son also did not give up. And in fact, one of his queens, she was somebody who was so strong. In fact, she was strong enough to give up all her jewelry, whatever she had, to the soldiers, to the army, to fight the Arab conquerors, to fight the marauders. So that was one very interesting role played by a woman in those days, in the 8th century. Of course, Indian history is replete with examples of women fighting from the front. But in the 8th century also, Rani Ladi, she in fact gave up all her jewelry, and she encouraged the soldiers, her retinue, to in fact fight effectively against the Arabs. This is one episode that I have mentioned, also highlighting the role of the Queen as far as the first chapter is concerned. Now, moving to the second chapter, which is on the destruction unleashed by Mahmud of Ghazni. In there also, there are episodes in which we find that the kings of India did not willingly give up their territory. So the Indian kings in many history textbooks, particularly in textbooks like that of Satish Chandra, Irfan Habib, and Romila Thapar, and all these works of Marxist scholars, will find that there was no unity among the Indians. That is the narrative that they have set, that there was no unity among the Indian kings. There was also the fact that they did not mount any pressure on the invading armies. They gave up very easily. But when we look at the conquest of Somnath, in fact, not only the fact that the Indians guarded Somnath, Mahmud of Ghazni was also, in fact, when he goes away, when he's trying to retreat to Afghanistan, there are two Hindus from that region who, in fact, show him another way, just to kind of just so that he loses his path on the way. So people were actually making a lot of effort to defeat these people. So there was no lack of initiative, there was no lack of intent in dealing with these Turks or in dealing with these Arabs. So when we look at the period of Mahmud Ghazni's invasion, there was also a time when there was a lot of unity between the Hindu Rajas, which is of course not mentioned in many of the textbooks. In 1008 AD, for instance, the Hindu Rajas of Ujjain, Kalinjar, Kannauj, Gwalior, and Delhi, and even Ajmer, they come together to fight against Mahmud of Ghazni. History books will not mention these things. General history books, which everyone is taught. In fact, even I was taught when I was graduating and doing my masters and then PhD. Even I was taught these very same Marxist writings. These episodes of the resistance that was put forth so vehemently and so arduously by the Indian kings is something that is not mentioned. And the main narrative is that the Hindu kings were weak. There was disunity. We could not oppose the invaders. We could not oppose the marauders, and which is why they kind of came and they destroyed our temples. It was our fault. So the blame has to be pinned on the Hindus, that we could not protect our territory. But that is not the correct version of history. In fact, the Hindus were very intent, were very keen to protect our territories. We were very keen to protect our territories. In fact, in 1008 AD, as I mentioned, many of these Rajas came together to oppose Mahmud of Ghazni. And even when we look at Muhammad Ghori's invasion, which is also a very interesting thing, in 1191 AD, in the Battle of Tarain, there are two battles that were fought. The first Battle of Tarain and the second Battle of Tarain. In the first Battle of Tarain, which was fought in 1191 AD, Prithviraj Chauhan defeats Muhammad Ghori. But no history textbook will highlight this. It is only the second Battle of Tarain, in which Muhammad Ghori comes with a larger army and also uses extremely divisive methods, treacherous ways, in fact, to kind of defeat Prithviraj Chauhan. That aspect of history is highlighted. So what we have been attuned to learning in these past so many decades is only one side of the narrative, only one side of history, that Muhammad Ghori defeats Prithviraj Chauhan. But Prithviraj Chauhan's victory over Muhammad Ghori in 1191 in this first Battle of Tarain is something which has not been glorified, not been highlighted. So can it actually be called a victory? Because the first battle was not won by Muhammad Ghori. So can it be called an absolute victory? So some of these episodes, I have mentioned in the book in the first couple of chapters. I've also looked at the regional sultanates. There is an entire chapter which is dedicated to the regional sultanates. Of course, I've looked at the wrath of the Khaljis and the bigotry of the Tughlaqs, but the temple desecration in regional sultanates is something that I have also focused on in one chapter. And therein, I have looked at how temples were desecrated and destroyed in the sultanates of Bengal, in Gujarat, and in Kashmir. Kashmir, of course, there is an entirely different chapter that I have written about, and the Sikandar Butshikan and the kind of destruction, the blatant destruction that he carried out of the Martand Sun Temple, which was a structure which was created by Lalitaditya Muktapida, who was a very important ruler of the Karkota dynasty. And he, in fact, not only built the Martand Sun Temple as a place of worship, but also as a center of learning, and how Sikandar Butshikan of the Shah Miri dynasty destroys this temple and destroys the edifice, and now it lies in ruins. And in fact, for the Kashmiri population today, they refer to it as Shaitan Ki Gufa. It's actually the Martand Sun Temple, the glorious Martand Sun Temple in the Anantnag district of Kashmir. So a lot of these episodes I have covered in the book, and also how this hatred, how rulers like Sikandar Lodi, how rulers like Ibrahim Lodi, how Iltutmish in fact desecrated the Mahakal temple. So how these rulers had a lot of hatred for the people whom they were actually ruling over. And the fact that idolatry was something inherent to Islam. So in the introductory chapter, I've mentioned that it is not surprising that these people, that the Turks or the Afghans, or later the Mughals, behaved the way they did, because it is as per the injunctions of their faith that they were supposed to break temples, and they were supposed to destroy temples, they were supposed to destroy idols, and also put the idolaters to sword. So There are innumerable references in the book, and also, of course, there are many references to the works of the chroniclers who have mentioned this, because a lot of them were, in fact, visitors who had come along with the marauding armies, and they, in fact, had to write glorious things about their patrons, about the invaders. So they have mentioned in many of their texts, and in many of their verses in their texts, that such and such temple was destroyed, and how the idol was destroyed, how the Hindus were killed, how many of them were killed. Some have even given graphic descriptions of how people were actually put to the sword. So the book is, in fact, replete with certain such examples.
It's very interesting to note that most of the Rashidun Caliphate and all these caliphates which were there during the early part of Islam learned a lot from the Constantine's wars. So Constantine, in the name of Church, Roman Catholic Church, destroyed Latvia, Lithuania, all these countries which were very much filled with Romani people. Romani people, we all know that they were connected to India or Hindu civilization.
Right.
They attacked Sarai Kali temple, which was in southern France. And so all these Islamic invaders used the same methods to destroy and actually, if a Hindu complains, then their idea was, how can you complain? You are a kafir. Like, this is the kind of question they used to ask. There is no need for you to campaign also. They're completely brainwashed. And the same thing happened with the Christian Crusades also. If you look at the Crusades in all these countries which I just mentioned, the same story, that how can you complain? We are the saviors.
Right.
And that was the whole point over there. So now comes the second part. Now these things are very clearly taught in the Western academics. Only thing which is not taught is the Hindu history, because even though the Hindus are still the largest population in the world, almost 1 billion people, but and more people are taking up Hinduism in the Western world, and yoga has become 60 million Americans follow yoga. Almost 80 to 90 million Europeans follow yoga. So it's like a huge population now. Almost, if you combine it, unfortunately, they are not in power. Maybe one day they should understand that the yoga community itself can come to power on their own. They don't need anybody else.
Right.
One day, hopefully, soon. So now coming to the in the Indian academic system now, which are very much influenced by Macaulay and Max Muller's initial definitions on like they denigrated, mistranslated Hindu scriptures to tell that there are a lot of faults in Hindu culture. Like one of them is a caste, which is a European word. It has nothing to do with India. So they try to impose their faults on Hindus just to tell their people that, look, everyone has a problem. All religions are bad. But we all know that two religions have been principally bad. And now more and more people are getting educated. So in your viewpoint, based on this entire research that you have done, what are the essential facts that need to be taught to Indian students, particularly from the year of 8 years to 18 years? Because that's the formative years. And after that, people already have the fixed views. It's very difficult to change after that. But 8 to 18 is a very soft age where if the real history is given to people, including even Muslim kids also, because they should also learn the real history. And then what is going to be the impact on the Indian civilization or Hindu civilization or Vedic civilization, whatever you call it?
Right. So I think the first and foremost thing that needs to be done is that the NCERT textbooks, because NCERT, of course, is the curriculum, the curriculum which is part of the NCERT textbooks is what is taught in all the central schools and most of the public schools across the country. Now, NCERT textbooks need to be rewritten. And why I say this is that I did a project last year on what is the problem with these textbooks. And believe you me, I found that in most of these textbooks, the historical narrative is completely one-sided. In fact, when you look at the ancient history part, which is, I think, for us, for Hindus and for people of our civilization to kind of learn about India, about Indian history, about Bharatiya Sabhyata or Indian civilization, I think ancient history is something that we need to go back to. Of course, I have specialized in medieval Indian history because I needed to also look at how these Islamic invasions had an impact on us. But if you look at the ancient period of Indian history, the chapters of NCRT textbook are replete with things like the degraded position of women in ancient India, the caste narrative, the narrative of sati, the narrative of how people used to kind of look down upon others, who look down upon people of other denominations, how there was slavery in India. But if you look at the the nature of slavery, in fact, we cannot say that there was slavery at any given time in India, except when the Islamic marauders came in and they brought in with them their own slaves from their own part of the world, the Turkish slaves. Before that, in Hindu civilization, there was nothing called slavery. We cannot understand that as chattel slavery, which was prevalent in the Greco-Roman period. It was very different from that. Domestic workers, of course, existed, but there was no chattel slavery. Also, the position of women. We have to look at the works of scholars like A.S. Altekar and not at works of scholars like Romila Thapar and Irfan Habib, which is the first and foremost thing that we need to do. We need to, in fact, if we have to teach history to our students, to students in India and anyone interested in learning about Indian history, what we need to do is that we need to do away with this dominant Marxist discourse which is in place at the moment. And we need to also look at works of A.S. Altekar if we have to study the position of women in India. That is the actual position of women that was there in the Vedic period. So we had sages, we had women sages, Gargi, Maitri, and who in fact indulged in a lot of debates. And it was not that women were confined to homes. Manusmriti, for example, is a text which has completely been misinterpreted by Western scholars and by, of course, Marxist scholars also, and also the narrative of caste. So when we look at the NCRT textbooks, when we're talking about a very impressionable age, when we say that students from the age to 18 age group, so when we look at the textbooks that are taught to this level of students, it is extremely faulty. When we look at the NCRT textbooks, extremely faulty. In fact, I also happened to analyze some of the textbooks from Gujarat. I think it provides a very, very comprehensive understanding of Indian history. It also says a lot about the region, the region of Gujarat, but also about Indian history. A lot of information is given about our kings, our temples. So the comprehensive nature of history is something that needs to be promoted. Also, the fact that we should, in fact, be looking at our rulers, our dynasties, the role that our kings played. Instead of that, what we are focusing now is on how these invaders come in and establish their rule. What we should be, in fact, looking at is that how our kings defeated them, how our kings, if they were not able to defeat, at least they gave them a befitting reply. That is the thing that we should be looking at. When we look at Shivaji, for instance, we study Shivaji in the context of Aurangzeb. That is something I find highly objectionable. We should be, in fact, studying Aurangzeb in the context of Shivaji. So instead of this Mughal-centric, Sultanate-centric, or colonial-centric history, what needs to be taught is an Indian-centric history. I think even our museums, our libraries, parents have an important, very, very significant role to play in this churning, in this I would say in this revolution of bringing about something new, and in kind of reframing Indian history. It'll be it's a very uphill task, as I was mentioning, but it can be done, it should be done. And I think the place to start is with rewriting Indian history and Indian history textbooks.
Very good points you made actually, and I was noting them down. So then the NCRT textbooks you mentioned just now, and also the role of the Education Ministry of India. Now the whole world views, and when you look at the human rights movements all over the world, they are geared towards the oppressors. It's like that there's no clear definition of aggressors and invaders and people who are invaded or oppressed. There's no clear distinction anywhere. It's like whosoever, there is a very important word is in the Western colonialism is discoverers, founders, and keepers. So if they discover something, it's theirs. So the entire USA, which was a European colony, everybody knows that. Australia, Canada, these are all European colonies. And Europe itself is a colony of the Vatican Church. And South America is a colony of the church again, Vatican Church. And what happened to South Americans cannot be told simply. So if India, 80 million Hindus were killed between Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India, 80 million Hindus were killed according to Western scholars. And in South America, more than 120 million people killed. And North America, approximately 80 to 100 million, which has been hidden. Now, this is the history. Now, the whole world is looking at Indian historians to reinterpret the history. Like my last book was also Gold, Glory, and God, which somebody was trying to tell me that I read. Now, in that, also I've tried to, and this is, I just touched the tip of the iceberg, just 30,000 feet level. I couldn't go down because those move, no way we can go down. If you go down, it's like an ocean. Like what it shows on the top is 20 times below. So now people are looking at, and especially American academics, which I very clearly say they're bankrupt from ideas. And these academics, when they view the history from their perspective, which is European-centric view, and for them, Middle East is part of their culture because their religions came from there. There has been no alternative view from the Indian ministries. Like in the West, the government supports their version. In India, the government doesn't support the version. So if there is no report by the Indian academics on Western history or Middle Eastern history, so don't you think the changing of the viewpoint, like we are looking from this side, now we look from this side, will help actually authors like you, if the Indian government starts saying in their public gazettes that this is their version, their view, like Chinese are doing. Chinese are saying from their point of view now. So don't you think it will change everything, including foreign policy? Everything else changes after that.
Right. In fact, Indian historians, Indian scholars, why only historians, even anthropologists, political scientists, everyone. In fact, we need to own up the fact that we are equipped enough to counter the Western narrative. It will all begin from there. The problem here is that we're not trying to own up the fact that we can present an alternative view. There are some historians who are making inroads, who are writing alternative histories, but very unfortunately, that is happening only in, over the last 10 years, I would say 10, 12 years. Before that, these historians were named as fringe elements. Now, the fringe is becoming mainstream because of reasons best known to us, but it will happen gradually. It will not happen suddenly. The problem here is that the historians, the scholars are not able to own up the fact that we have something important to say and that, we can put it out in the public discourse. The problem is that we are not able to realize it. And until and unless we realize that, the government cannot endorse something that the historians or the scholars are not, trying to even popularize, trying to publish. So the works of Jadunath Sarkar, if you look at the pre-independence period, the works of Jadunath Sarkar did not rely on the support of the government or for anyone to endorse his works. He wrote from a certain perspective. He called the Mughal period a period of alien rule. He called them oppressors. And that is how he presented his version of the invasion or the rule set up by the invaders. So the historians, the scholars, political scientists, if you have to look at foreign policy as we were discussing, I think we need to own up the fact that we have something to say. What has happened over the years is that we've become too shy to put forth our views. We think that, oh, the West will criticize us. Washington Post will write something, or the New York Times will write something against us. They will squash our opinion. But we need to, irrespective of what happens and what the Western media writes, Indian scholars need to own up that we have a narrative. We are the oldest civilization in the world. We have provided knowledge. We have provided yoga. We have given Ayurveda to the rest of the world, which has benefited millions of people across the globe. So here we are with our arguments, with our statements, with our version of history, with our version of foreign policy, with our version of geography. We need to put it out in public domain. And that is when I think some change can be expected.
See, one of the points which was raised by the most of the Indian scholars, there are no evidences, but Qutub Minar is a very big evidence. There are many. Even if you look at the old fort of Delhi, it's a big evidence, because right in the middle of the fort there is a Kunti Maharani temple, and Krishna's temple, which the ASI is planning to throw out. Anyone who is watching this video must complain that that Kunti temple is from the time of Pandavas. So it's more than whenever Pandavas lived, the temple is since that time. And Kunti Maharani there's a mention in Mahabharata that she used to walk down the steps to take the water from Yamuna. And that well is still there, goes 200 feet down. Anyone who has gone down. And on the side, the biggest irony is there is a museum over there, which has all the Hindu old deities, which should be worshipped, not shown in the museum. See, what Vatican has done, wherever they go to conquer something, they keep the murtis of that place in that place to show that they won this. The Christian rulers won it. God has given them the right. The entire Egyptian deities before Christianity, they call Coptic Christians, they are all stored in Vatican. So the ultimate goal of all these invaders was to put Hinduism in a museum, Sanatana Dharma in a museum. And unfortunately, we are still glorifying them through ASI and through other organizations, where the ASI came out very strongly that Mahabharata could not have happened more than 1500 BC, which is a Western version. It's called syncretism. Syncretism means that everyone has to tie their dates around Jesus, to Jesus, back to Jesus. That's called syncretism, in short. And somehow we are still continuing that. Every Indian scholar tries to match with BC and AD. And if you look at Bhagavad Puran evidences of Buddha and everything else, then 1150 years after the birth of Parikshit is the Nanda comes. 1050 years, a Panchashat. And then after 100 years, then Buddha comes. Then Buddha goes way back. So, but they have tried to remove it, complete evidences, because if Buddha goes up in the dates, like goes back, then the imaginary date of 180 or 080 fit for Jesus doesn't come into being. Huge conspiracy on the whole world. And we are all calculating BC and AD, BC and AD, BC and AD. Nowadays, again, and I thank Wokeism actually here, that they call it Common Era. Otherwise, we wouldn't be calling Common Era. So even people have played with the dates to prove their version. So like when you say 600 AD or this AD, then it's actually directly ties into that. And it is a very well recorded fact that Muhammad's life was written in 10th century, not before that. So Quran came into existence in 10th century. And historically, if you see, and the Jesus history, whatever history was there, I don't believe in that. But anyway, that came into light in the 7th century, not before that. The 6th century was the Council of Nicaea, where they decided. Now, all these blatant are available on Wikipedia, which we don't trust at all. It is a Wikipedia version. Now, if you look at but there is no Indic version, which is Bhagavad Puran, Mahabharata, Ramayana, And so many great scholars who come on this channel, they regularly quote the different dates, and they easily go back 3 4 thousand years back than BC calculation. Now, so this is the game with the dates. Now, game with the dates. Now, so in your perspective, when you look at the things, the how do these dates have played a important role in continuing this mythology of continuous rule of these oppressors to India?
Right. Now, as far as dates are concerned, very clearly, all the books, all the textbooks which deal with the ancient history period, or even when we look at the sources of ancient India, Mahabharat and Ramayana are very clearly shunned as plain myths or mythology. Now, that is something which itself is very, very problematic. So, whether you look at a VD Mahajan, which is used for students who are preparing for UPSC, or you look at Upinder Singh, or you look at Rumila Thapar, any of these Marxist scholars, or even the non-Marxist scholars, mostly have in fact, looked at the texts like the Bhagavad Puran, or the Puranas in general, the Purans, the Upanishads, the Veds. The Vedas are, in fact, I would say, a repository of knowledge which it is very difficult to, in fact, periodize them in that sense, because they have provided us with so much. And as far as this dating is concerned, again, yes, what you said was right. It is very dubious, because the Western scholars wanted it to be an alignment with the BC and AD dating that was prevalent in the West, and they actually thrust that upon us. So we, as the oldest civilization in the world, are not, should not be forced, in fact, to kind of follow this kind of a dating. In fact, we should come up, as I was mentioning, that we have to come up with our own version of history and put it out in public domain, that this is what we think, this is what we believe in. And Mahabharata and Ramayana is not myth. In fact, a lot of political parties in India also, for getting a lot of political leverage, have periodically mentioned Ramayana and the existence of Lord Ram as mythical. And of course, with the Ayodhya judgment and a lot of talk about the Ram Janmabhoomi temple, that has been completely debunked. So the existence of Lord Ram, the existence of Lord Krishna, and all these factors which are very important and which should be considered as part of history, has been pushed to the narrative of mythology, that it did not happen. It is all in our imagination. It did not happen. There is no evidence. Of course, there is a lot of evidence. As we were talking about the old fort, there is clear evidence of Mahabharata. You go to Kurukshetra, there is clear evidence of the Mahabharata taking place. And if any historian, if any scholar feels that there is no evidence, and on what basis can we prove that these things actually happened, the Mahabharata war actually took place, there is clear evidence. There is a museum in Kurukshetra which has clear evidence. There is the old fort, the Purana Killa in Delhi, which has clear evidence of the Mahabharata, actually spanning out. Also, we spoke about the Qutub complex. When we enter the Quwwatul Islam Masjid, which was the first mosque in the northern part of India, which was set up after the conquest, there is an inscription written which clearly states that 27 Hindu and Jain temples were broken to construct this Quwwatul Islam mosque. And the Qutub Minar was nothing but, something that was a tower which was constructed to for the muezzin to give the call for prayer. And there is, of course, and also if you look at the pillars of the Quwwatul Islam, they're all temple pillars. So all, pillars that were taken from those broken temples that were in and around Delhi. 27 Hindu and Jain temples were in fact broken. So what more evidence do we need? What more evidence do we need of the destruction that was unleashed by them? And yes, as far as dating is concerned, again, like everything else, we need to put out our own version of Indian history. It's high time that we, believe in everything that the West has to tell us.
In 1901, a new education policy to India was announced. And 1901 was the caste system implemented by the British in India, 7 upper caste, 7 lower caste, on lines of the Spanish casta system. Now, because in the Spain, the royalty are considered upper caste, everyone else is a commoner, which is a lower caste. So there are only two classifications in Spain: upper casta, lower casta. Similar on the other similar lines, 7 castes, upper caste, 7 lower. 1920 Indian Police Act came. People can verify it, and the Police Act was meant to keep the status quo, so that the no Hindu rises up, because the British were scared of Hindus because it was the largest population. If they rise, it will be difficult for them. So they gave some of them, they bribed with good positions, some of them they bribed with good. In fact, Jahangir used to be sent clothes and European women so that he can keep quiet while the Dutch East India Company looted from Kolkata. That was the whole ploy. And that's why they moved the capital to Kolkata, because it was the richest port of India, richest port, more richer than anything which India has so far seen. Because Dutch East India Company is known as the richest company the man has ever known, even richer than East India Company. So this was going on. But surprising thing is those laws are still there. There's not Indian Police Act is based on those laws. So it was Indian Civil Services was created to keep the Hindus subdued. It was a translator between the British and the regular Indians. It was not like said to be permanent etched in stone. Even a small country like Vietnam removed all the laws as soon as the colonials left, and the Dutch left, the French left Vietnam. We have not done any such thing. So we are trying to survive under such, and it's a really great credit to follow Sanatan Dharma that they have survived. And all the credit goes to the rishis, munis, and parampara, that despite living in, see, everyone else needed a political change, laws change. But Hindus have survived despite the same laws being there even today. Even today, the people are fighting for independence of temples, which was a British law to take away all the wealth of the temples and supply them back to the queen. So this is still going on. Now, what is your hope now after writing this whole book?
I think that I'm very hopeful. I'm an eternal optimist. So I do believe that someday Indian history, the historical narrative itself, will be changed, and I hope it happens soon, because there are a lot of historians nowadays who are in fact writing and presenting a lot of evidence. So as there was a lot of talk about lack of evidence in the earlier periods of history writing, but nowadays scholars are actually presenting evidence. Like in my book, I have given evidence from the works of these chroniclers, the very same Persian chroniclers whom these Marxist historians have glorified. And when it comes to destruction of temples, they fall flat. They keep quiet on that aspect. But on other aspects of history, those very same chroniclers are glorified by Marxist scholars. So evidence is there. There is no lack of evidence. So what happens is that, there was some kind of fear perhaps, or people were considered to be fringe. People did not want to make that effort to kind of, put forth their views. But now I think times have changed, and not to denigrate the efforts of the scholars who have written in the past and been very vocal about it, people like Jadunath Sarkar and even Sitaram Goyal ji or Meenakshi Jain ji, and a lot of scholars have actually done a lot of creditable work as far as rewriting Indian history is concerned. But coming to the point that the root has to be redefined, which is the school textbooks. It all boils down to that. How can we best, come up with a solution, come up with a formula to rewrite NCRT textbooks? Because that is, something that needs to be done at the earliest. And I'm very hopeful that, the NCRT management would someday, in fact, employ historians and work on this aspect. And also the fact that we need to become more vocal about it. Historians, scholars, writers, everyone, in fact journalists, we have carved out a space of our own now, and we need to become more vocal about what we've been working on. So instead of saying things like, oh, it's a masjid, it has been made, it has been constructed, let it be there, why should we get into a controversy? It is high time that we say that no, this is a masjid, but it was built on the site of a temple. Temples were destroyed to construct this. So I think we need to become more vocal, and I'm optimistic that things will change
Now,
and history will be rewritten.
thank you. Hindus are the largest followers of Vedas in the world, and the Hindu culture is the only culture where the women have taken leadership roles, whether it's in military, politics, or any other culture, any other aspect of life, including science. Like Shabari was considered a scientist also, because she was very good in very few people know this fact that when Ram met her, this is not general conversation. She said she has changed the rules of the nature. She had, like, the animals, like lions, were able to play with the deer without hurting them. She was able to change those rules. Now, so most, in no other culture of the world, whether it's Abrahamic culture, any Abrahamic culture, where women are viewed as an object, not as a person of respect, but in only in the Hindu culture, where women are considered the first teacher and the guru, the first guru of anyone, anybody who's there. Now, the equality was this equality was attacked. India was wealthy when this was very much in system in place, but now the Abrahamic onslaught attacked this inequality because the Muslims are very scared of being killed by a woman. British were shocked when Rani Lakshmi Bai put a child on her back and attacked them back and defeated them 7 times. So the point is, the now again the women have to lead the revolution, like authors like you who have to lead the revolution to wake people up. So what is the role of the Indian women historians who are now coming up? Like, there are many people out there who are speaking now. Shashi Bala is one of them. You are one of them. Many other. Manoshi Sinha has written a wonderful book. So what is the role of the Indian women historians now trying to teach men about their history? Because men have turned into slaves nowadays.
No, I think we need to believe that it's a composite, culture. I mean, men and women are equal in that sense. So it is not only that women have to teach men. In fact, we have to learn from them also. So in fact, women historians, of course, have a very important role to play, in the sense that the fact that women played such a key role in Indian history, right from the ancient period, right from the period of the Mahabharata, from the period of the Ramayana, from the Vedic age. I was mentioning Gargi, Maitri, and there were many other women who were sages, who were writers, who were orators. So women have played a very important role, and it is high time that women historians also lead the way and try to kind of change this historical narrative, which I think in many ways people are realizing that it is faulty. The problem was that earlier people were not able to understand what is problematic about Indian history. What is the problem? They were not able to pinpoint the problem. Now the fact that historians have pinpointed that this was the problem. When we look at the NCERT textbooks, for instance, we can very clearly pinpoint that this is the problem on this page, in this paragraph, that needs change, that needs to be changed. When we look at the textbooks of medieval India, or when we look at the textbooks of ancient India, now we know where the problem lies. So the point here is that who is going to question, and how much of questioning can be done? So here I feel that historians and women historians have a very important role to play. Women and men, I think, let us be gender neutral in that sense. Historians in general, scholars in general, have a very significant role to play. There are, historians like Venus Jain ji, there is Meenakshi Jain ji, there is Manushi Sinha ji. There are lots of scholars, independent researchers, historians who are working in this direction. And women have always led from the front. There was mention of the Rani of Jhansi. There was also Rani Durgavati, who was the Gond queen, and who in fact played a very pivotal role in putting up a stiff resistance against the army of Akbar in the medieval period. Then There was Rani Chinnamma of Kittur. So we have Indian history is replete with such examples, and I think Rani Didda of Kashmir, for instance, we have had Bhakti saints who have led the spiritual regeneration of many people in India. So we have to kind of look at it from that perspective, that if women could do it in that century or at that point of time in Indian history where they did not have the resources, women can do it now. And it is high time that women should lead the bandwagon and speak up.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chandni Sengupta, and for coming on the show and sharing your views. And viewers, do check out her book. And if it is available on Amazon, you can search it out by her name. Is it right, Dr. Chandni Sengupta?
Yes, it is available. It is available with my name and the title both. So, on Garuda Prakashan as well as on Amazon. And it was an absolute pleasure being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you all the viewers who are listening. Do comment on the show. That's the most important. We need your interactions over there. And you can ask questions over there. And if she has time, she'll reply to those questions on the video. Thank you and namaste.
Thank you. Namaskar.